What's up, everybody? It's Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads. And with me, I have Jake Payne, our editor in chief. And together, this is our What's the Headline podcast. What's happening, man?
In the words of E40, my friend, I am sick with it. But
Sick with it, literally, right?
literally, if I sound like Macy Gray, that is why. But I'm on the
You always sound like Barry White on Brandy. I mean, with cigars. So I mean, like,
man, I haven't had a cigar in years, but that's
why
funny.
you gonna put that on Macy Gray though? Like,
Oh, yo, listen, I was just talking. I said to you on our last episode, I spent 4 days, 4 days in Chicago, and I was with one of my oldest and best friends in the world, and we were reminiscing on all the concerts. You know, we talked about the loss of Dave, and he and I went to a De La concert when we were just like 15, 16 years old. But one of the first times my friend and I ever hung out, embarrassing to admit, but like it was a Macy Gray concert, and I always remember because oddly enough, I was like 14.
wait, this is a dude?
This is a dude, man.
So you and a guy went on a Macy.
There were listen, there were other people there. Let the record show.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Like,
It's like when you go to the movies with a friend and you leave a seat empty between, like, you and I have never seen a movie together, but I guarantee you, if you and I go to the movies, we will not sit right next to each other.
Yo, the craziest thing, my college roommate and I went to see Keith Sweat in concert, right? And Keith Sweat got the New Jack Swing thing and everything, but the headliner was Freddie Jackson.
Okay.
And when Freddie Jackson came on, we felt mad awkward, so we ended up literally crawling out of the theater. It was
really
wild. Yeah,
that's hilarious. Whenever I hear the name Freddie Jackson, I just think of that Chris Tucker joke in Friday. Janet Jackson, more like Freddie Jackson.
Oh man, it's been a hard week, right? Like, I will say that Jake and I have been working on something that we think is going to be massive. Can't give details, but be on the lookout in April for a partnership that we have that we think is going to be gigantic, and the heads are going to love. But it's definitely been behind the scenes pretty taxing. Our workload has been intense. No complaints, just acknowledgement. Often when you're doing what you love, it doesn't feel like work, even if it is intense. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But how you feeling, man?
I mean, it's funny you say that because, shout out to Large Professor. You feel like a mad scientist. Like I would say these are back-to-back 80-hour weeks and maybe closer to 100, because obviously you and I have other things that we have going on and families. And, I'm in the process of getting married, like crazy stuff. And, even me being sick, I'm like, I've been sleeping 5-6 hours a night. And when you're working on something exciting, it's not even just being tired. I don't know about you, but I often find like I go to bed and my mind is racing because there's so much adrenaline and there's so much excitement and creativity. And it's been just that. And, my lady had a cold and I got it now. But in a way, I'm grateful that it's happening right now, because this weekend I have a lot to do, as I'm sure you do as well. And I'm like, you know what? It's motivation to hunker down. It's still March. It's still like it's raining right now in Philly. So it's the perfect time to kind of get some great stuff over the finish line. So that's how I feel. How about you?
Yeah, I feel you. Like, I woke up a couple nights ago at like 3:30 in the morning, and my mind, just started racing about all this stuff that's going on. And I was up for 2 hours, just laying in bed, tossing and turning, trying to like meditate, trying to like quiet my mind, but couldn't stop, man. Can't stop, won't stop. So yeah, I totally feel you on that. Before we get into it, just a reminder to folks, if you like what you hear, please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, whatever
Reviews,
that button is. Yeah,
whatever,
reviews, whatever, comments. We've been trying to be more responsive in comments. Anything, we always appreciate it. Ali also suggests, I've been lately listening to podcasts on 1.5 to 2.5 speed or 2 speed, like, and listening to the playback for this in order to like lay out the notes and everything. I got to say that Jake and I find us to be far more entertaining on 2X than we are on 1X. Neither one of us is the fastest speaker, but like, it is hype. It's not chipmunk like Jake has still got the Barry White, or I'll say Macy Gray in his voice. But our energy is off the charts. It's like we each had like 8 espressos. So like, even if you try that just for a few minutes, I highly
Listen, man,
recommend it.
I got a cup of coffee right now that my friend Aaron gave me, and it's got my name on it, which probably shows up backwards on the screen. So yeah, I get stoned on caffeine oftentimes before we tape these because I never want to sound sleepy.
That's dope. That's dope. Well, yeah, we got a lot to talk about this week. Every week we really try and step back, not get caught up in the cycle and chasing. It just gets really mundane and I think leads down a path we don't want to go. We want to truly deliver the ambrosia. And this week we had something that is an extremely rare occurrence, which is J. Cole did an interview, right? Like what's the last Cole interview you can remember?
He did, correct me if I'm wrong, he did Nardwar like at the tail end of 2020. It would have been 2021, because out of that is when we learned that Ian, there's a story on AFH about this. It was actually like Cole mentioning to Dr. Dre, right? Like through some go-betweens, through some mutual parties, that he was interested in signing Kendrick Lamar. And in classic Nardwar fashion, he was pulling out all the stops, pulled out things early in J. Cole's career. And he talked about that. And he also spoke about even recording in the studio that like his career kind of began. And that's one of those things. That's like, Ludacris or Tyler Perry driving the cars that they had when they became famous, or back when they didn't have money and power and fame. J. Cole is one of those dudes who kind of puts himself in that mindset. So I would say that's the last interview of scale I can remember. Can you think of one more recently?
Nah, not one more recently, man. And I really struggle to think of the last one before that. To me, it feels almost like Angie Martinez. And that was a long time ago, like,
He
several years ago. There's one, I think, in between, right? Where he's at a house or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, he did the one where he sat down with Lil Pump as they were like going back and forth. And that wasn't like an interview, but it was like a documented conversation. There's been some documentaries. There was the one on his love of basketball, which ties into the one we're about to speak of. And then he did a really good interview, and I want to say 2018, with my man Paul Cantor. And I forget, was that for Vulture or something like that? And that was a print interview, but it was a really, really, really good one. But yeah, Angie is the last time that I can remember Cole sitting down. Like, no shade on Nardwar, but Nardwar has a very formatted interview. Angie was the last time they were sitting, if I'm not mistaken, at Salam Rami's house at the grand piano. And it was on video. We covered it on the site. And that was kind of like a hip hop personality doing a Q&A with Cole.
Yeah, that's the last one I can think of, man. And it's part of a growing trend. We've seen that with Kendrick. He did a really short interview backstage with a little girl. I think it was 12 or 13, from Miss Morale, right after getting off stage from a concert. He did a print, to your point, interview much later in the cycle, I think, just a few months ago. So,
we
like
covered that on AFH. Yeah.
8 months later. Drake has not done an interview that I recall since that Rap Radar interview back in 2019, 2020, whatever it was. There's a trend where artists don't need to talk to the media anymore. They go straight to fans. They do stuff through social media. To your point about J. Cole, they'll release a documentary. They want to control their own narrative. I think a lot of times it's because when you do interviews, inevitably people will take a snippet and do clickbait and, twist your words around, take them out of context and all that stuff. But why do you think it is that people have fallen back from media?
I mean, I think that's just it. And I think it's gotten way worse. And you also realize, I mean, Jay-Z made the point, I think around the Blueprint era of like, I am making you dollars. Like if I do an interview and I'm a star of Drake or J. Cole or Kendrick's level, like that can help make your year a whole different year financially. So at the same time, what are you doing when I'm not giving you an interview? What are you doing for the artists that I've signed? And I love that, because instead of kind of strongholding media publications into being super favorable, which when I started out in my career, I can remember the bigger companies, the bigger record labels and crews, like they would sometimes, try to pressure you to do more coverage for a B, C, or D level artist to make sure you got the A. And I think all publications, even, far beyond hip hop, have had to deal with that. And now it's just a free for all. And these artists, A, I don't think they want to be used that way. And B, it's the kind of conversation, I think that if you're an artist, you enjoy maybe talking to a Nardwuar, because he's not going to ask you he's not going to ask you about a beef. But at the same time, Nardwuar got Jay-Z talking about Jazz-O before they reunited simply by pulling out the record. So it still works on that level, but you're not sitting with somebody that's dying to get the ace out of the hole, and get you to say something controversial or be totally fan out of like, yo, J. Cole, what did you mean when you said, which some artists love, but I have to believe that other artists don't enjoy those type of questions. They really like letting the songs just kind of, fall where they lie, or lie where they fall. Yeah. And I think that way, when you're having a conversation with somebody out of industry, you can talk about bigger, more abstract or more applicable things to your career, your success, or your art.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's why Cole chose to do the interview that he did. The most recent one is with Bob Myers, who interestingly is the GM, the general manager of the Golden State Warriors. So it's for ESPN, and it's for a show that Bob Myers has. I had never heard about it until this, but it's called Lead by Example. And he sits down and talks with notable figures. A lot of them are basketball related, obviously. But he sat down with Cole because there is a legit basketball tie, and the first half or so of the interview is about J. Cole pursuing his basketball dreams, and he talks a lot about success. And that's the part I want to do a deep dive on. But, some of the things that he talks about leading up to that are, he started off with basketball dreams, and, and watching some other interviews that we'll discuss. A lot of artists start off that way. A lot of people start off that way. My son wants to be, professional ball player. And, I think lots of people do, but Cole was good. He got cut from his team a couple of times in high school, like Michael Jordan, worked his way up to varsity, and then went to St. John's. And many people probably thought he did that in order to be close to basketball. But he reveals in the interview that he went there because St. John's is in New York, and he wanted to be somewhere close to the mecca of hip hop, because he really had tucked away dreams about being a rapper. And so you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that part is really interesting. I have some friends that actually knew Jermaine loosely at that time, and one of my best friends, Steve, I think lived on the same floor or a floor above. But I remember they had a mutual friend, Damon Scott, who later became the editor-in-chief at Complex and now works at Dreamville. Like all of those St. John's kids, excuse me, St. Joe's being close to Philly. But yeah, I mean, you're in Queens, so you are just a few train stops away from all the record labels, all the, gatherings. And J. Cole and I are, within 2 or 3 years of each other of age. So at that time, you had a lot of just like gatherings and pop-up events. So if you're going to be in a place to be famous and, to get discovered and get your music in the right hands, New York in the early to mid 2000s is 100. I can't think of a better place. I think it's better than LA, Chicago, Atlanta, especially if you're that age and don't have a car and you want to hang out outside of SOBs or hang out outside the studios. It just makes a lot of sense. And on top of the fact, Jermaine Cole was a smart dude, and St. John's is a very good school. And, if you're a basketball fan, that's a great place to be as well.
For sure. New York City is just not bad to be in general. So, one of the things he talks about, though, is the notion of delusion. He believes that you have to be deluded, intentionally, purposefully, in order to achieve a certain level of success. When I was at BT, we did this show called BT Honors, and we gave this award called the Visionary Award to Berry Gordy, founder of Motown. He gets on stage and he says, for me, being a visionary is proving to the world that you're not crazy. And when you step back and think about it, if you're going to do something new, especially something that is going to be culture defining, change the course of literally the world, you have to believe and say things that sound crazy to other people because they haven't happened yet. And so you're spending your time proving to the world and maybe even yourself that you're not crazy. And so I really like that Cole talks about delusion as one of the secrets to a success. But the flip side of that is that when you delude yourself or you set up those kind of grand expectations, you also put enormous pressure on yourself. And one of the things I thought resonated for me in the interview was that he talked about how he really didn't feel like he was succeeding. Like he didn't feel like he had his championship run until 2014 Forest Hills Drive, which is his third album. He had 2 albums out before that, relatively successful, right? You don't get to do a third album unless you have some success with the first 2.
Yeah.
But he talked about the pressure he was feeling around those first 2 albums. And there were enormous expectations around this guy. This guy is Jay-Z's first signing, if I remember correctly, or definitely the first rapper that he signed.
At Rock Nation.
At Rock Nation.
Yeah.
At Rock Nation. Yeah. Clearly, you know, Jay had signed tons of people before that at Rockefeller, but at Rock Nation, this is his first signing. There are huge expectations. He had put out the warm-up, which for me back in 2009 restored my faith in hip hop. I'd stepped away, like, you know, from hip hop, that, you know, the stuff that was popular at the time, it was mostly Ye and Ross was popping and Lil Wayne was popping and things like that. But it wasn't anything that really drew me in, like substantively. But when I heard the warm up and the hunger and the lyrical, like, you know, dexterity, it was Cole that really brought me back and like reignited my love for hip hop. And so as I was watching this interview, he talked about the doubt that he had. And it reminded me that, you know, back at South by Southwest in 2013, we had a Music Matters showcase, and it was Big Sean, Marsha Ambrosius, Dom Kennedy, J. Cole, and like a bunch of other super dope artists. I think Wale was there. And afterwards, we were all hanging out downstairs. There's like a VIP lounge downstairs in this club. And I remember seeing Cole, and he was kind of hanging his head low. And I was like, yo, man, like, you got to remember who you are. Like I said, you're young Simba. Like, I mean, and then I told him the story that I
You said that?
You. Yeah, I told him the story that I just told you about how he truly like restored my love for hip hop. And I could see, I highly doubt he remembers this, but I could see then that the words resonated with him. And, you know, it's amazing that, you know, shortly thereafter, obviously nothing to do with me, but I'm sure a ton of people were saying similar things to him. And eventually he said it to himself. But a year later, he came out with what many still consider to be his magnum opus.
Meaning 2014 Forest Hills Drive?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So, you know, that point that he makes, I love that, because I will tell you, and, you know, my journey with J. Cole begins around 2009, I would say, maybe 2010. Really, like, I remember hearing him on the feature with Miguel, that song, I can't think of the title of it, but I can hear the beat.
Power
with the
Trip.
drum.
Power
No,
Trip.
the first one.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun,
All I Want Is You.
All I Want Is You. Yeah.
And I remember riding him in my truck in Philly and hearing that, like, you know, that like 7 at 7, like Make It or Break It type thing. It was Cosmic Kev or somebody, and they played that record, and the beat had me. And I was a fan of Miguel at the time, and Cole had that distinct voice. So boom, that was one. The second was Lights Please. You know, which just a great record. I think that was on the mixtape you're talking about.
Yeah, the warm up. Yeah,
it was on the warm up, and yeah, and then when it really crystallized for me was 2010. He had that feature verse on the Reflection Eternal album where it was him, you know, Talib Kweli, Mos Def, Yasin Bey, Jay Electronica. I think it's called It's Just Begun, or it's I think that's the name of the record. And every one of them. I mean, it's a murderer's row of great verses. And Cole, you know, at that time I was like, okay, like, you're good, but how are you really gonna, like, you know, make an impact in this game? And that verse is incredible. He hangs in there with most Talib and Jay Electronica. But at that same time, it was funny. I went to see Jay in October of 2009 in the Blueprint 3 tour, and J. Cole performed. And I think I said this on a past episode, they were still putting up chairs. You know, the lights are all the way on. I saw it in Baltimore. And you know, J. Cole had like the worst possible time to perform. He was before Wale, before Tabby Bonet, you know, like, and he worked that crowd. And I can't say that he got them, but he still was out there and gave it his all. And then, you know, his first album dropped, and I got the chance to, it's funny, I'm sitting in my basement with my records, and I think I showed you when you visited last year, but I have a signed I think it's Lights Please, like Christmas note from J. Cole, where he's like, thanks for all your support. And just like you with BET, like, I don't I don't know that I did anything, but we covered him a lot when I was at Hip Hop DX, even I think ahead of his rock signing. But when that album came out, Cool World, I thought it was fine. You know, I thought it had some really cool songs on it, but I didn't think it was among the best albums that year. I did like Born Sinner. I thought that because that dropped on the same day as Yeezus and Mac Miller's Watching Movies with the Sound Off. And I thought that it was a level up for him. But you're absolutely right. Not until 2014 with the, ironically titled 2014 Forest Hills Drive did I realize that all of that potential could culminate on one album. And I love that J. Cole said this in this interview, because so many artists would have just accepted working with Jay-Z. So many artists would have just accepted, having a hit on the radio or putting out a noteworthy album. But J. Cole held himself to a standard. And even for him to admit that in this interview, it's kind of like Bob had to drag that out of him a little bit, because he is so humble and so focused.
Yeah, I was just flat out disappointed with the first two albums. There were songs that I liked, Can't Get Enough and Crooked Smile, but generally I didn't think they delivered on the potential that I heard on the warm-up. And it was interesting when I reflect on that conversation we had. I remember one of the pressures he had, and he talked about this very vocally in the press too, was that he had a lot of pressure to deliver a radio single, and that was the thing that kept holding the album back. And then so you flip it, and he said this too in this interview with Bob Myers, that in order for him to really get to that next level, that 2014 level, he had to let go of his need for validation and being the best. And so still got to believe in himself, but it wasn't enough for him to hear it himself. He needed for others, the media, and he wanted everyone to talk about how he was that guy, that the best dude. And when he let go of that is when 2014 happened. I also thought that when he stopped trying to chase singles, and potentially, and we've talked about this before with Kendrick, with Dr. Dre, instead of leaning on the machine, the Aftermath machine, or the Rock Nation machine in Cole's case, or Dre in Kendrick's case, or Jay in Cole's case, that's when he really stepped into his own, right? There were no features on 2014, which at that time was just, no one was doing that. Everybody had multiple features on every album. So for him to put out something that wasn't chasing radio hits, that didn't have a feature from anyone, and just really be about himself, shows that he did achieve that. He didn't need validation from anyone. And that's when it really paid out for him.
You and I did a podcast episode, I believe in 2022, on why J. Cole is the Tim Duncan of hip hop. And that was a very respectful headline and title, for reasons that anyone that listens to that will soon quickly see. The thing that I think about is, I don't know about you. I signed up. The first time I paid for a digital streaming platform was 2013 for audio. Like, I'd paid Netflix and stuff, but 2013, and I think I did so later in the year. And J. Cole is an artist that has, kind of gone around radio, kind of gone around those outlets. So it's so interesting that, when he put his first album out, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, it's a different climate. But by the time you get to 2014, in my mind, at least, everyone was starting to kind of turn their radios off and pick up their phones or pick up their laptops and consume music. And to the point that he makes to Bob Myers, he didn't have an album to sell anymore. He didn't need radio to sell an album or make you aware. He could make the album and just count on quality and word of mouth to bring people to it. And in a way that's different than Kendrick, right? Because like Section 80, in my mind, even though I paid money for it, it was a free album. Like, I believe in 2011, you could go on SoundCloud and just get the album. You could download it. Like, TDE wasn't concerned with selling it, but J. Cole was signed to Rock Nation, distributed through Interscope. I think at the time might've been Sony at the very beginning. And he still had to play into that machine. So once he could kind of use the resources around him and culture had caught up to him, I think that he really lightning struck, and we do see it on that third album.
Absolutely. So another interesting thing he said on this interview was that he didn't see himself as a leader in the industry. I thought that was interesting because literally just a day or two later after this interview dropped, there's a story and there's video footage of Cole in the projects in New York City. I think it's in the Bronx or Harlem. I can't remember, but it's uptown. And he is just listening to a aspiring rapper, like, in an informal listening party in a lobby, just spitting, and giving the dude encouragement, talking about how dope the verse is. The guy's like, yo, I need to put a second verse. Cole's like, nah, man, just let that go. Put it into the universe. Like, the people are ready, watch it fly. And, as we reported a couple of weeks ago, Cole also was on YouTube searching for a J. Cole type beat, found one, and then like laid vocals to it and just put out a record on this, unknown producer's beat. Like J. Cole, like, to me is more of a leader than just about anyone in terms of like the deeds that he does in order to help put people on and motivate. So, but what did you think about that? You think it's ironic that he doesn't see himself as a leader?
I think it's just a testament to staying humble. Like J. Cole is that guy that, again, to use other points, like during the protests, after the murder of Mike Brown in 2015, like he was the guy that people, that were taking it to the streets in New York would look over and see J. Cole walking with his 10 speed, or with his mountain bike. He's the guy that, did $1 concert tickets. Like J. Cole's brand, and not for nothing. I mean, we've seen the Bentleys in the videos. The guy clearly lives a good life. He's not out here trying to, pander, but he still has made himself super accessible and minimized the gulf between him and his fans. And when he does things like that, I mean, I've said it to you before, I don't know if on this podcast, but J. Cole makes being a hip hop superstar look really fun, and also because he doesn't seem to be a tortured artist either. But I like that. I mean, I think he's just being like we see, just like, hey, I'm regular, but I'm also super competitive, but I'm not going to talk a lot of ish and say I'm the best, unless I do it in the verses, which he has.
I love that he likes to be inspirational. And I think that comes from someplace deep inside him. Like, I believe that he needed that in his life at some point, and he's trying to pay it forward. And so the thing that really stuck out the most to me about this interview was later on, he's asked, 3 things he would tell people who are trying to achieve his level of success. And here's what he said. He said, first of all, see yourself as high as you can possibly see yourself. So if someone wants to be an NBA player, to me, that's not enough. There's a wide range of NBA players. There's an NBA player that never saw the floor. He was in the NBA. LeBron James is in the NBA. Who do you see yourself as? And there's no right or wrong answer. Clarify and define your vision for yourself in the highest possible position you can see it. Do you want to be a 12-time All-Star? Do you want to be a league MVP? Be as specific and see yourself as high as you possibly can. That's your first job, is to see it as high as you can see it. Be delusional even, going back to that delusional point, right? Right at the apex of what your mind believes is possible, push past that even a little bit and define it. Like, that is just like, that to me aligns with so many different things that that you see across multiple philosophies, like self-help, positive thinking books. Like, one of the first things that these books talk about is visualizing, envisioning yourself in the scenario that you want to be, because it crystallizes in your mind and gives you something to work toward, and basically tricks your mind into thinking that you can achieve it. But how did that strike you?
Absolutely. I mean, the buzzword that I think we all hear or say or have somebody in our circles that says, whether we embrace or not, is that manifest. Like, be very deliberate and be very bold in what you want for yourself. And I love that J. Cole asked you to be specific. I think I told you, I know I told you personally, I don't know if I've said, but like this year, for the first time in, 38, now 39 years, I created a vision board. And I used to think that stuff was corny, but like, and I didn't, I didn't put 100 things on it. I think I put like 9, or I chose 3 areas. But you have to be deliberate in your asks of the universe and in your motivations to yourself. So I love that, and saying that being in the NBA isn't enough, because there's a spectrum, and it doesn't mean you should always ask, tell yourself you need to be a 12-time All-Star. But decide, do you want to lead in a category? Do you want to be a champion? Do you want to be part of a team? Do you want to be an MVP? And I just think that's brilliant wisdom.
Yeah, man. And, if you read books like Think and Grow Rich, to your point about vision boards, one of the things that has you do is write a paragraph, a specific paragraph about where you want to be in X amount of time. And then you're supposed to read that paragraph aloud every single day. until it happens. So, it's about the repetition. So that leads to number 2 for Cole, right? He says, number 2, it's not just enough to imagine. He says, number 2 is believe it. See it all that time and believe it. And whatever you got to do to protect that belief, do it, basically. And he says, my version of protecting that belief was I wasn't sharing it. I'm not even going to give my own mother the chance to try and bring me back down to reality. It's not going to happen. I thought that was so powerful. First of all, you have to have faith, right? It's not enough to just have the vision. Have the very clear, specific vision, but you got to really believe it. And, this is what I think Grow Rich and other like books have said is like, you have to believe it with all your heart, like in order for it to happen. But Cole's point about protecting that belief was really resonant with me, right? Because a lot of times it could be friends, it could be family, it could be significant others. A lot of people, like Barry Gordy said, are going to think you're crazy. And it's not like malicious or people deliberately trying to tear you down or whatever, but people plant that doubt. They don't want you a lot of times to be disappointed. They're trying to protect you even, but they want to tell you, don't set your standards too high or like, this could happen or whatever. And Cole's like, listen, I'm not giving anybody that opportunity. I'm going to keep it to myself, but I'm going to believe it. So, did that strike you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely it did. When it comes to motivations, like I'm a very private person. Like you have to pry out of me, unless you're in my innermost circle, which you most certainly are, of like, where I can dream on you, like I can tell you like where I'm trying to go, what I'm trying to do, the changes I'm trying to make. But what really resonated with me about this is just the dream shatterers around people. And it's so interesting because, I don't think Cole is, he's showing how sacred it is that he's not even going to tell his own grandmother. But I thought that was interesting being a child that says he was taught he could do anything or be anything, because you have that juxtaposition. And even still, he's not out here broadcasting that. And, I will tell you that I've had people around me that have shattered my dream. Like I've had significant others that will say, you're not going to make it. Like you're just not on that path. And I've chosen the path over the person, and I think we all come to those sort of ultimatums. And so it's a very real resonant jewel of wisdom.
Yeah, and that point, that's a great one about his mom. Yeah, you're right. His mom did tell him that he could do anything. And I've found that to be a common element in, the people who've achieved the highest levels of success in hip hop and probably life in general. Puff definitely was very vocal about that. Kanye, very vocal. You saw in the documentary Genius, his mom, like, always bigging him up. Jay-Z, like I think it's pretty critical to have people at the very least not limiting you, but in some ways hyping you up.
So you're a father. I mean, is that something you've instilled in your sons?
Absolutely, absolutely. First of all, I never put any pressure on my kids. My dreams are not their dreams, and so I don't instill that in them. And I also, never plant any doubt when they say they want to go to the league or do whatever. Like, cool, like keep working. This, what you don't see a lot of times is the grind that this person puts in. So just keep that in mind, and that's actually the third thing that the Cole talks about. He says 3 is work towards it. You have to do the work. And because you love it, it's not always going to feel like work, but sometimes it is, and so those 3 things, first of all, envision it specifically and in a grandiose way. Number 2, believe it with all your might and don't let anyone else like create doubt around that belief. And third is work towards it. Were his secrets to success. And so watching that and listening to it, it took me back to a series that we did back in 2012 called Grit. We did this with Rapsody, Ab-Soul, Big K.R.I.T, and Kendrick Lamar. And I was motivated to do it at the time because, I'd met all these artists and I wanted to figure out what the key to success was for them, because without exception, like just about every person that I met had been grinding and working at their craft for 7 years at least, with 0 positive indicators that they were going to succeed. Literally sleeping on floors, like, 10 people in a van, 12 people in a hotel room, eating ramen noodles, dirt poor, performing for 12 people, like that kind of thing for 7 years. And like what sustains a person that long, and I wanted to figure out, what separates those who succeed from those who don't. There's a lot of creative people out there. There's a lot of people who are put into position to succeed. But the thing that like separates those who do from those who don't is that they don't quit. And so I really wanted to get at why they didn't quit. And as I was listening to this Cole interview, it really reminded me of those things. So I want to spend some time talking about that. But before I get into it, you have stories like that about grit and, artists you've seen or, worked with that demonstrated that?
Yeah, I mean, that is just like, I think of Kobe shooting those those jumpers, right? Like every day. And I see that a lot in hip hop. And it's not just like putting out music, but doing the work. We didn't talk about it, but that third point, I think, is the biggest difference from those who talk about it and those that be about it, like doing the work and accepting the parts that are not glamorous, that like you said, people sleeping in a van or just the hunger pains or picking up a second job and not telling anyone, whatever that is the key differentiator. But yeah, it's funny. I mean, the first time you and I met 11 years ago next month, you were right as I walked out. You and I kind of had like a loose interview, connected, and as I was walking out, it was at a hotel bar in New York. K.R.I.T was walking in and you were about to film the grit episode with Big K.R.I.T.
Oh, is that right? That's crazy.
Yeah, man.
That's wild. Okay. I did not remember that. That's wild. That's
but
really crazy.
To your question though, like
yeah.
I can't think right now specifically of those examples, but I always just think, and I know he's not necessarily in favor right now, but I always love that Kanye verse on Spaceship of like, working for these summers and like really putting in the grind that nobody ever sees to get you there. And there's always that thing that's on social media of like what people see, which is just like the tip of the iceberg, literally in the illustration, and the years underneath the surface that people don't see. And I think that is especially true in a creative industry or in an entertainment industry like hip hop.
Absolutely. So I asked the same questions to each one of these artists, and they were thematically very similar to those that Bob Myers was asking J. Cole. So one was, how long have you been doing music? Because I really wanted to establish that these guys have been doing it much longer than most people think. A lot of people think that these new artists were coming up in like the 2010s, like the TDEs and the Coles and people like that. But these guys have been grinding for 7 years before that, like before anyone heard of them. So that's one. What keeps you motivated? Did you ever feel like giving up? Because I think a lot of times people think that these guys just like are iron people and never ever like have any doubt. And you'll see this kind of split across the board in that regard. What got you through it? Because obviously they didn't give up. So what kept them motivated and kept them going? And then what advice would you give to others coming after you? And that's where we got that goal from Cole. So it struck me, man, how similar these responses were. So with Kendrick, and those of you watching on YouTube, I'm going to link these videos, so you'll see them pop up. You can find them on our YouTube page if you just search, the person's name and grit under for Spotify or whatever. Check it out there too.
We'll do it in the story too as a playlist as well as a bonus beat.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so Kendrick had 500 songs on Stash in 2012. So Kendrick fans know that he released Good Kid, Mad City in 2012, and these interviews were done in 2012. So just keep that in mind too. He had 500 songs on Stash, and none of them were ever going to come out. Like, so this dude has recorded 500. Like, a lot of people don't record 500 songs in their lifetime. This dude recorded 500 songs that had never come out, and he said, when you can still feel good about what you're doing without really caring what everyone else is thinking, they'll respect you as a leader more. Then they'll listen. Then when they find out you're really talking about something, it's over. That was in response to, before he had been chasing. And if you go back and listen to old Kendrick stuff, there's songs where he sounds like Wayne, there's songs where he sounds like Jay. He really didn't step into who he was until the Kendrick Lamar EP. And so he talks about when he stopped chasing others and leaned into who he really is, that's when he had success. But that part struck me very similarly to what Cole has said. You have similar thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I love that. Just be original and really find yourself. And I think that even as much as I love Section 80, I think by the time Good Kid, Mad City comes around, Kendrick was completely himself.
Yeah.
And that's when things start to really J curve.
And not caring what everyone else is thinking, right? Like, Cole was saying that too. Like when he stopped seeking that validation is when he really took off. Kendrick also said that hit records start with what the people want and not what record companies or radio. So he said, once I figured that out, I just went for the gusto and started doing music I thought people needed to hear instead of what everyone else was telling me to do. And then when asked him about his advice to upcoming artists, this is what really blew me away. Again, these are 12 years apart, and presumably these guys weren't talking about this, or certainly if they were, Cole's not going to remember some stuff that he and Kendrick were talking about years ago. But Kendrick said, you got to have the vision first before anything. He literally started with that, right? Exact same blueprint. And we'll get to that like reference in a few minutes, but exact same blueprint. You got to have the vision first before anything. And then he quoted 50 Cent, something that 50 Cent told to him that he wanted to pass forward, which is talent will never outshine a person that works hard. No matter how much I was born with ability, if I didn't have that grind and that vision for it, then it would never come to light. So you got to have a vision for it, and then that vision comes with the dedication behind it. To your point, like
That's
you got to really grind.
That's that perspiration, versus talent thing. Like I love that, and I love the fact that 50 said that too, because I don't think neither you nor I would call 50 the greatest lyricist, but there was a reason why he dominated for several years and continues to be a force within this. And I truly believe it's his grind and dedication. And also to Kendrick's point, his vision, of where you're going to go next. And, if we ever get the chance, and I hope we do, to ask Kendrick, I'd be curious to know how much of his reality today is the vision he had 11, 12 years ago.
Yeah, man. 50 Cent went from being a mixtape rapper to someone who was shot and nearly killed, to a mixtape rapper again, to signing with Dr. Dre and becoming arguably the biggest rapper on the planet for a year or two, to now having, potentially the biggest, like, or maybe second to Tyler Perry or Oprah, but like one of the biggest TV empires for a Black media mogul in the world. And took that, he took his talents from Stars to Fox. So, I mean, this guy, like, you talk about vision.
Yeah, I want to break the fourth wall for a second. I mean, do you remember just like what your takeaway was as Kendrick was telling you this 11 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway was, okay, so this was at South by Southwest, so it was March of 2012, right? I didn't put it out until October of 2012 because I knew the Good Kid, Mad City was coming, and I wanted to put this out as a series.
Yeah.
And like the world changed massively, right? So just full transparency, and this is not a flex. This is just like what the nature of our relationship was. My relationship with TDE is that, so I was on a panel with Kendrick and Kevin Liles and Kevin Liles, the former president of Def Jam and like now president of 300 and so forth. Jana Fleischman, who was the PR head of PR for Rock Nation, still is to this day. And like more than that, she's more than that. Tatiana Simonian, who was the head of music for Twitter, myself, and then ironically moderated by TJ Holmes, right? So so the night before, TDE came to my room. Like, I mean, there was like literally like 10 dudes in my room, right? Like shout out to Ray, who's still PR for Interscope now. But he got the guys in my room. So Kendrick, Q, Ab-Soul, and J-Rock. I interviewed all of them that night. And I did Grit with Kendrick and a couple others with the guys. And Kendrick, he could do that. He could move around like that. He went down to the hotel, to your point about what happens in the hotel lobbies and Nardwuar, to do a Nardwuar interview. And like, for those who want to like really like do a deep dive, if you look at the Kendrick Lamar Nardwuar interview, at about 10 minutes in, the cameraman pans a room and you'll see me standing in the background. Kendrick skips over me in the introductions when I'm in the background there. But I knew Kendrick was great, right? Like Section 80 was something that really like blew me away. His Cypher performance, which he had done one before that, was incredible. I thought he was special. And I thought that he had the potential to blow. I don't think anyone, including himself, knew that he was eventually going to become a Pulitzer Prize winner, win 17 Grammys. But I'll tell you also, Dave Free, when I left BT, said he's going to continue building the biggest record company in the world. Like Dave Free's vision was, I am going to build he said, I think this is the biggest record company on the planet. There was no, and he said it with such conviction and like nonchalantness. It was wild, but I got to assume that Kendrick's people, because Dave and Kendrick have been business partners and friends for years, they're going to have like-minded mentalities. So stepping back all the way to that point, I got to think that Kendrick always believed he was going to be there. And Kendrick is a man of deep faith and all these things. I think he probably believed it and probably envisioned it for sure.
That's wild, man. I was in that same South by. We threw a showcase when I was at DX. We were moving in the same streets, possibly in that same lobby, because Nardwuar kept popping up at our showcases too. It's funny how the world is small, man.
Yeah, man. I got my picture with Nardwuar, and he's doing his pose too. It's dope.
That's dope. So you said Kendrick. Even though it was you that conducted the interview, unless you would rather, I can explain some of the things that K.R.I.T broke down on the night that you and I met, if you want to talk about serendipity.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
So K.R.I.T, who has been an ardent supporter of AFH, our readers back in 2017 picked his album as the album of the year, which was great when we used to do that and let the readers decide what the best was. But back in so that would have been 2012. So a month later, boom, you came back from Austin. Interviewed K.R.I.T in the Hudson Hotel in New York City, April of 2012, and K.R.I.T at that time. So just for context, Live from the Underground was out. I guess he would have been Catalactica. I don't think was out yet, right? Do you remember?
No, it was not out yet. It was definitely not out yet. Yeah.
So he's in between those two albums, if memory serves. And at that time,
he hadn't had his major label debut yet.
Oh, so Live from the Underground wasn't even out yet.
Yeah, he had not had his major label debut. Yeah.
My goodness. Okay. So he said at that time, I work 18 hours per day, which is insane because you think about it, that leaves 6. That leaves 6 for sleep, for relationships, for anything else that you have to do. That is how dogged an 18-hour workday is. And obviously work isn't just necessarily making songs, but, balancing a career, answering those emails, checking in with, so-and-so. But I thought that's staggering, as somebody who works a long workday. His motivation, this is what I love to do, what I believe in. So again, that echoes Cole's point, that echoes Kendrick's point, that belief, that and also that that desire, like a little bit of both. This is where I want to be and where I believe I'm destined to be. So it echoes that. Sort of to your point about the vans and some of those hunger pains. K.R.I.T said that he slept on couches of friends and family for years. And let's not forget, I mean, this is a Meridian, Mississippi artist who, in order to make it work, had to spend a ton of time in, New York and in Atlanta and presumably LA. So we can only imagine what that looks like. Also, and I really like this point, his faith in God in sustaining him when he felt like quitting. So, and anyone that listens to K.R.I.T's music knows just, how strong his faith is and the role that God plays in his music. So these are his points of advice. And I love the fact that, again, Grit as a series did this. To echo what he just said, stay prayed up. Number 2, build a foundation. Surround yourself with people who believe in what you're doing. It's extremely important. And that, kind of echoes J. Cole's point of like, do not share, protect this thing, and don't share it with people that might try to talk you out of it or might try to knock you down, or even if they love you, even if they're doing it lovingly. So protect that. Number 3, invest in yourself. Do not try to shortchange. So, that can be equipment, that can be the quality of mixes, that can be artwork, that can be, a host of things. And, now we know, I mean, at that time, K.R.I.T was signed to a major label, Def Jam, but, since then he has put his last 2 or 3 albums out himself. I know he has BMG distribution, but that investing in self mentality is still huge and core to K.R.I.T's business.
Yeah, and to that point, elsewhere in that same conversation, K.R.I.T said it's better to give out 1,000 CDs than to sell 100. And I remember seeing him at South by one year, and he was out, like, as all these artists that we've talked about so far were on 6th Street, walking, just giving out CDs to people, like grinding. That grind was real. I saw it occur with these guys.
Yeah, and I mean, K.R.I.T was another artist when I shared that contrast between Kendrick and Cole. K.R.I.T, up until this point, I mean, he was very active in putting out mixtapes, as was The Way, but he had that creative control and didn't have to, chase a single that way. I know they did that remix to Country-ish, but yeah. So I love this point too. His fourth point is understand that it ain't going to work overnight. Anything that's worth having is hard work, and you got to be about that grind. I mean, come on now. That's like preach.
Yeah, that's a different dimension. Cole talked about it lightly about, you got to work, and that, sometimes it's not going to feel like work, but like K.R.I.T is like, listen, man, you got to be in it for the long haul. Like it is not an easy thing. You got to really, really be about it.
His fifth point I really like because it's assurance, and dreams are scary. I mean, I've been in this industry 21 years, and there are times where I'm still, that faith is, you get challenged, right? Or you're just like, am I on the right path? Is it happening fast enough? And this is what he said is his fifth and final point. I love this. If you believe in yourself and people believe in you, if it's meant for you, it's going to happen. And I love that because, like I didn't have somebody that 100% told me that. But that kind of reassurance in a crowded, oversaturated industry, it's just a nice reminder that in the end, self-belief and being other people believing in you, which I always just take to mean being authentic, being original, it is going to happen. And I love that, just to know that like this will transpire. So heavy stuff from K.R.I.T. Any other kind of takeaways you have from that conversation?
Nah, man, just, so far, all three guys, Cole, Kendrick, and K.R.I.T, very similar things. Have faith, believe in yourself. Don't let others like crush your dreams, and surround yourself preferably with people who are going to help build them up. And then grind, man, just that grind, So Rapsody is another person I talked to, and Rapsody, I did this one almost a year later. This is like maybe 6 months later at A3C. And it was with Ninth, and she just this is very early in her career. She had just put out like
The Idea Beautiful.
Yeah, The Idea Beautiful, that mixtape.
So she was probably working at that point on She Got Game, which I think was 2013. So coming up on that.
Exactly. So she said that she had recorded with Ninth for 2 years before putting anything out. And in that time, they did 100 songs, right? So just like Kendrick had 500 songs in the tuck, Rapsody had 100 songs in 2 years, and they didn't use any of those songs that she did. Those are literally that was just like her, like honing her craft and figuring out her voice. And she said part of the reason why she was motivated to do that is that, and this is a quote, Ninth has all these accolades. He has a Grammy. He's worked with so many legends, and he's still up till 3 a.m. in the studio with her. So I need to stay longer than he does because I'm a new artist. So if he's in the game and he's doing that, I need to work 10 times harder. Like, I mean, that grind is like insane. And then when I asked her, how much she worked, per day, she said that, she would often go in at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon and not come out till 10 in the morning, and on average, it was 12 to 15 hours per day, she said. And, she's told me in other conversations, when she's in like actual recording mode for a project, it's quite common that she'll spend a night in the studio for multiple days. Like, I mean, the grind is real. Another thing she said, and again, this reinforcement about having positive energy, like just not having people who bolster your dreams, and certainly not people who like in any way like infringe upon them. He said, surround yourself with good energy in the studio. And then when I asked her if she ever felt like giving up, both Kendrick and K.R.I.T both said they had definitely felt like giving up at times. But for K.R.I.T, it was his faith, and Kendrick, something similar, just like they just kept going on. But she said she never felt like giving up. She got frustrated at times, but she never felt like giving up. And then her advice to upcoming artists was be patient with yourself. That's something that, I think kind of goes hand in hand with like K.R.I.T saying that it's going to take a long time, but, be patient. And she said, put yourself around people that are better than you to help you grow, which I think is another dimension of that, positivity. To listen more than you talk. And that is something that I think is hugely important. She says to listen more than you talk, especially the people who've been there before you and where you're trying to get. And then lastly, she said to work hard at your craft. And she quotes Ninth and saying, if you want to make music or anything in life, you have to make it your life. So I thought that was dope. And then last thing she said was foundation is patience, hard work, and listening.
I really like that point she makes about Ninth, like seeing somebody that, has all of these accolades, working so hard. So you should match their hustle at the very least, hopefully go beyond it. And, I mean, you and I have both worked, other positions in our lives, arguably that had bigger staffs or, more, I don't know, the fringe, more stuff. But often, one of the secrets to our partnership, to us working together, is I look at you and I watch how hard you work. I even said it to you last week, even as I was traveling, and it was kind of like not a bachelor party weekend, but like a celebration weekend. And we had all this stuff going on. And I was like, man, I see how hard you're going. Like at the very least, like let me, because you were like, you can do this thing if it works for you, if it works for your schedule. And I just love that. And I think that not only makes for great product, but it makes for true partnership and true collaboration and chemistry. And I think that, you'd be hard pressed to find a mentor and a protege or a mentee relationship in hip hop as strong as Ninth and Rhapsody's. And when you read a quote like that, it makes total sense.
For sure. And before you get into Ab, you just reminded me, like, the whole reason why this resonated with me so much is because, if you're trying to achieve something, man, you're trying to build something out of nothing, you're trying to take it to greater heights, no matter what it is, whether it's music or a business or, whatever. I find inspiration in this, and looking for those common elements and trying to figure out what that blueprint is. And so hearing these words inspires me. And so I hope that us sharing it with others is going to be inspirational to someone else who might need it at this time too. But you want to talk about Ab-Soul?
Yeah, absolutely. And just one other point I want to make, is that always resonates with me. And even before I ever saw this Rhapsody thing, I used to 10 years ago right now, I had a small studio apartment in Philly, and it was right down the street from Philadelphia International Records. Like that building's not even there anymore. But that's obviously, the label that put out Tenny Pendergrass, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Billy Paul, stuff with the Jacksons. I mean, that's Gamble and Huff. That is you mentioned Berry Gordy. That is Philadelphia's, Hitsville. And I walked by one night because I had spent a little bit of time there, and I saw Leon Huff, one of the greatest songwriters of all time, carrying out a like construction bag of trash and putting it in the dumpster in the alleyway of the building. And I had talked to him once or twice, and I said, "Oh, Mr. Huff," and I even pointed out, I was like, "It's wild to me that he was like, come on, like my name's on the building, so to speak, but I do everything. Like I still work like I'm on my first day." I'm paraphrasing. But I love that when people don't get lost in the lights of success and still love this and work. And that's one of the things that I'm getting from all of these folks, but especially Rhapsody's point, I think's really strong like that.
Yeah, I had a conversation, to that point with Top Dog once from TDE. And this is recent. This is like backstage at a Reason concert. And he said, I tell my guys all the time, hustle like you broke. Like, and you hear it in their interviews too. Like, if you pay attention, you'll hear that. So the TDE guy saying that, but that's real, man.
Absolutely. So Ab-Soul, and this was 10 years ago. So this is after Control System, right? Like, was this the same? Was this South by as well?
I think no. This was after. This is like 6-7 months after.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, but Control System is out. I mean, he's riding high, doing all that stuff. But here's his points. He says he wrote his very first verse at age 12 and has written a verse every day after that. I love that point. And, you know, if you listen to his latest album, I would still believe that to be true because he's back in peak form. What motivates him? This is a very Ab-Soul answer. I love it. Humanity. 1,000 people in harmony together through his music. And that the year you did this, that October, so around the time that you know, Good Kid, Mad City was coming out, I went to the Music Matters tour that you helped very much put together in Philly, and I saw Ab perform, and I was blown away at how invested the crowd was. Like, he had made those waves. So I can only imagine what that felt like for him on the stage. He's never thought about giving up. He says, worst case scenario, I'll be sleeping on a park bench. That ain't too bad. I know a very old man who's been doing that for a long time. Smiling. That's a solo quote if ever there was one, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. An advice to up and coming artists: give it about 10, 13 years. If you got that time to give and go hard every minute and you think about it every minute, it will give back to you what you give to it. I promise. I love that because I've heard similar quotes. Somebody the other day that you and I were talking about that kind of had it was a 5 or a 7 year plan, but to give it 10 or 13 is insane. And that again just goes to show you the commitment to vision, and what those results take to crystallize. So just a super, super big point. And I could argue that, you know, Ab-Soul is getting his flowers. I mean, Control System was a really important album, and it began to show all the different lanes that the TDE movement was winning. But late in 2022, you know, I'm starting to see Ab get that standout individual recognition in a way that I hadn't before. So, I mean, that even unto itself goes to show you that decade plus vision.
Yeah, man. And so I thought it would be cool to close this out. This is not an interview that we did, but I'm gonna go ahead and set my vision high and say that one day I will interview Jay-Z. And this, I'll be like, I'll keep it 100% funky on this. I actually had the opportunity to interview Jay-Z back in like 2013 or so for a BT special. And we were doing this show, BT 30, celebrating 30-year anniversary of BT. And we got Jay-Z, and Stephen Hill, who was my boss at the time, the head of BT Music, said, you know, I think you would be great to interview Jay-Z. And I clenched up. Like, this is before I'd done these interviews like extensively and stuff like that. And I didn't want to screw up the show. And so I said, listen, we should have our VP of development, the person who's like really running point on this show, do it, because I didn't want to mess it up, right? And it is still one of my biggest professional regrets to this day. But I did get to ask a final question. And, you know, he had been there. He said he was only going to give us 15 minutes. He was there for like 50 minutes to an hour. He's like, yo, any more questions? And like, he said, because y'all had me up in here for a long time. And I said, I got one. He said, it better be good. And like everyone in the room got quiet while I asked this question. And I asked him the question. He said, that was a damn good question. And then he went on for like 10 more minutes, like, and it like became kind of the crux of the interview. And so even though I didn't do the whole interview, I feel like I did interview Hov a little bit, but I'll put it out there that we're going to do a full interview with Hov at some point.
The first time you told me the story, I asked, but since I don't think you've said this before on the pod, can you remember the question?
Yeah. I asked him, I said, listen, like, you've been successful for many years, through many different mediums. So, you know, not only Roc-A-Fella, but also Roc-Aware and then Roc Nation. I said, how much of your success do you attribute it to being, you know, in charge of your own destiny rather than being signed to a label? And he said it meant everything to him, you know, and then went on for like I said, 10 minutes. Just great answer. And I could tell it meant something to him to be able to talk about like how much being his own person led to his own success, you know, and that really kind of dovetails with a lot of the things we've heard today. But I thought it would be cool because Jay is, I think, for a lot of people, the pinnacle of success in hip hop, commercially, critically. He's got the most Grammys, you know, he's got amongst the most sales, and he's got the most money. He's had, you know, arguably the most achievements outside of the music. I think he's kind of like the Grand Master, and so I found this video that had a bunch of different quotes from Jay-Z about his secrets to success. Start and go in the same order as Cole because it's very similar to what Cole has said. So either Jay is rubbed off on Cole, or again, like we've seen in all these artists, maybe there's just themes, man, universal themes, and that's what I was trying to get to with Grit in the first place. So in terms of vision, he said, and this is from Fade to Black, he said, I'm going to go up there. He's in Madison Square Garden, walking through the hallways, about to do his show. He says, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to think. I'm going to envision myself tearing this down. That's how you do it. You got to vision it first. And then in terms of believing in yourself, this is another couple of clips. He said, you have to have such a strong belief in yourself that you can quiet all the outside noise. Again, going back to that Cole thought about don't let anyone quiet your dreams. Jay's like, nah, you got to have such a belief in yourself that you're going to quiet all that noise. And he said, there are people who are projecting their fears and their shortcomings and their failures on you. And you have to be very careful with that. People telling you, you can't do that. Why can't I? So again, surrounding yourself with the right people. And he said, it's not really about you. It's about their fear and what they feel inside. So you have to be strong enough and resilient to believe in whatever it is you're trying to do. And then he said, I personally don't believe anybody could stop me. It's just what I believe. I was destined to be here, and it just is what it is. And then, in terms of dreaming big, because Cole talked about that too, like being clear and grandiose in your vision. He said, I had a really outside dream of being a millionaire by the time I was 30 years old. And then when you think about You Don't Know, which we talked about in depth last week on the podcast, one of my favorite passages in that is 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4. 40, I'm at 80 million. I can't remember, but like he set his limit at like 80 million, then 100 million, man, right? And now we know Jay-Z is a billionaire twice over. So even Jay didn't think as big as he eventually became at the start.
Yeah, he dissed me one time because in 2017, I worked for Forbes doing the cash list that they put out every year. And that year he put out, figure what the Forbes figured, then figure more. He got it in. So I love it. Yeah.
And then the last quote that he had was patience and persistence. Right. So that's what it's all about, man. But I found just doing this, man, I found it to be super inspirational. Shout out to J. Cole for not only talking the talk, but walking the walk and sharing that inspiration with new artists, new producers, whoever it may be. I think it's pretty dope.
So I got to ask you, because you are one of the people, I've considered you, and I've said this to you before, a mentor, but you are also a very successful person. And what I mean by that is, you have, 3 great sons. I've watched you in meetings carry yourself in a way that I aspire to be like. I can go on, and we won't make this a love fest, but I want to ask you, what is, I won't ask you for 5, but is there 1 or maybe 2 secrets of your success?
Man, I think it's resilience. I think that we all have disappointments, especially when you have really high goals and expectations. If you have those outsized dreams that Cole talks about, you're bound to be disappointed periodically, a lot of times, and it's about not taking it personally, rebounding from it, believing that you're going to get past it and figuring out another path, and then keep going forward. That is the thing that I think is the through line for all these people, is that you just keep going forward. And the grit comes from different places for different people. Some people it's from faith. Some people it's their parents have instilled it. Some people, just are hard-headed. But whatever it is, if you can embrace that and lean into it and know that if you can get up more times than you've been knocked down, that you're going to win, that's what it's all about. What about for you?
I really like the work aspect of it, but one of the things, and actually it's a jewel that you've taught me, is you can work, you can do those 16-hour days every day, or 18 hours. I think who said that crit was 18 hours every day. But you also have to take care of yourself. And one of the things, especially as you get older and have family and more responsibilities, I've gotten selfish in that. I've gotten selfish in my boundaries and saying no to things, but I still at the end of the day do the work, and I still hustle like I'm broke, and I've been broke. And then, the other thing, and this recurred throughout, is like, put people in your life that you can learn something from and aspire to be like. And if people are negative, that's my circle. I'm a very loyal and loving person, but if I have folks around me who are constantly bitter or feel like they're owed something else, and that's the narrative that they lead with, that's their headline, I don't want that around me, because I truly believe that attitudes and success is contagious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, on the topic of hard work, there is a notable hip hop legend that is, rumored to have been one of the hardest workers of all time. And, I'll shout you out too. Like, you're definitely one of the hardest workers I know. Like, I think we foster competitiveness with each other in that regard. So I thank you for that. But on the artist side, Tupac was one of the hardest working dudes ever. Like, there's stories about him when he got out of prison and went to death row. He had not one but two studios going, so he could just be recording all day, and he was pumping out like 10 songs a day, just like output that, like, it was extraordinary. But Tupac was in the news. You want this week? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you made that point, and I'll come back to that. But Corrupt, who's somebody who made quite a few songs with Tupac. They were label mates, later in life, and I think friends. Tupac was an affiliate of Snoop and the Dog Pound even before he joined Death Row. But Corrupt was on the Art of Dialogue. You and I recently did a podcast largely centered around Melly Mel speaking to the Art of Dialogue. But Corrupt, who we had on this very podcast in 2021, I think, he sat down and he was just speaking of a side of Pac, and I've read just about every book and seen every documentary that I wasn't aware of. And this is Corrupt talking. He said Tupac was strength. Couldn't nobody tell him no. He tells people what to do. He listens to people, but he makes his own decisions. He was very strong-minded. And when he came to Death Row, he didn't come just for himself and all that. He wanted to change the image of Death Row. He wanted to add everybody else. He wanted to add to everybody else's table. He changed our work ethics, the way that we got in the studio and how many records we got done at the end of the day. He also adds something a little bit on the image side and the not superficial, but on the just appearance side. He said he wanted to change our apparel and how we looked, which, that didn't work, because that's you, Pac. That's y'all ish over there wearing khakis. Because you know what I'm saying? Pac loved it. He respected it. But he came, and this is Corrupt again, saying it's a fly ass dress code, because I couldn't understand. He was like, brother, put on the army fatigues. And instead he was saying, like, put on Versace, put on, name brand labels, get fly. And Corrupt admits, and you think about those 95, 96 Dog Pound images of those dudes in, like, blue sweatshirts and flannels and khakis. And he said that. And oddly enough, Snoop Dogg in a previous interview had said the same of, it was a reason why around the Dogfather, you started to see Snoop in tailored suits, and Pac even introduced him to his own tailor. And I think it's really interesting because, Pac went through his own transition. Like, I think he's one of the only artists that you can look at and know almost down to the year. And I know he had a 5-year run, but I can look at a photo of Pac and, based on what he's wearing, know what year it is, most of the time, because he went from, not having a lot to the army fatigue looking like 94, and 95 a lot of the year he obviously spent locked up. But when he came out, he dressed the part of a superstar and was one of the first artists that I ever remember wearing a chain. So it kind of lends itself to a question of, like, how, there's so many things that Tupac did while he was at Death Row that I think we can agree were negative, and watching his transformation from making an album like Me Against the World to some of those themes that you see on All Eyes on Me. There was, a lot of good music too, but he came out with, a bend. He had something to prove, quite a few things, but it kind of lends itself to, like, what were some of the good things that Pac added to a powerhouse label? Are there any that come to your mind off top?
Well, I mean, I think all the things that Corrupt said, I think for me, what it does is it makes me wonder. It just raises more questions for me. Like I wonder a few things. So first of all, Tupac, had all those songs that have come out posthumously. And now having heard that, Kendrick had 500 songs in the stash, and by now it's probably thousands, right? And Rapsody had 100 songs she recorded that she never released. You got to wonder if Pac would have even put that music out, like if he were alive, because he did have quality control, and this speaks to that. I think he had an image that he wanted to project, whether it be clothes or our attitudes or whatever, and so it raises that question. It also makes me wonder, what would Pac have, what would he have been into? What would his image have been had he continued to go? So for me, it raises more questions than not. But I think hearing, this side of him, you step back and think about who Pac was and why he was so compelling. He had so many different dimensions. He wasn't just a rapper; he was an activist and a poet and an actor, and all these things. It just shows you just what a chess player he was with all these things. You hear that about RZA a lot, and I just finished up the Wu-Tang series, and recently, but Pac was moving all these pieces in alignment, and he just had such a clear vision for where he wanted to go. Going back to our last conversation, I wonder where Pac would be right now if he'd been given that chance.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the point of this interview too, because Tupac, you and I recently, and speaking about Melly Mel, we're talking about our favorite rappers of certain times in our lives. And in the mid 90s, Pac was my favorite rapper, hands down, unequivocally. And it was the death row time. I mean, I just thought that music was so cinematic. It was so passionate. It is flawed all day long, but there's a lot to unpack there. And you mentioned a moment ago, like, Pac would take a studio and run multiple rooms at the same time, which is something that Michael Jackson also did when he was making the History album. He would take a group of producers and songwriters, put them in one room, and in Michael Jackson's case, across town, he would have another, like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis here, Renee Moore there. But with Pac, they had that studio, Can-Am, which is now, as we talked about, TDE. It's owned by Mixed by Ali, which I think is so dope. And in one room, he would have your Johnny J's and, for a time, your Dr. Dre's and your Daz's. And then you would have another room. And then there was even another room where he had guys that were just trying to get on. And he would go, like, do not, not in an arrogant way, maybe at times, but like, when the beat's ready, run it. I'm going to come in. I'm going to spit what I got to say. I might do it twice, and I'm going to go to the other room. And, All Eyes on Me was made in 14 days. The Machiavelli album was made in even less. And that album was made with people that were kind of the special teams producers. Those guys, apart from QD3 on To Live and Die in LA, they're all relative unknown producers. And that's still amazing music, like, Hail Mary and Toss It Up, and which was actually produced by Demetrius Shipp's dad, who played Tupac, Demetrius Jr. in the All Eyes on Me movie. But I think about that. That's work ethic, and that's the intelligence of catalog. And to your point, I mean, in the 90s, either you were going to put it out or you're going to hold it back. What Pac would have done had he been in control of his own music and lived past September of 96 only makes you wonder. Two other things just come to mind too is, like nowadays, the hip hop music that I love is a universe. Like we just talked about Jay-Z. Like you listen to a Jay song and you know who Tata is, you know who OG1 is, you know who DeHaven is, you know these names of people that have never spit on records, and you know what they mean in Jay's life because he creates a universe. And I think that in some ways, Tupac was moving towards that. And Death Row being a movement in the mid 90s, you look at a song like To Live and Die in LA, and as the beat plays out, he's mentioning a lot of the people that made Death Row what it was that weren't artists. Sure, some of them are guys in street organizations, but they were the people that helped give Death Row that image for better and worse. And to create that sense of family, that sense of honor, that sense of like, hey, you're the listener out there are going to know all that's part of this movement, I think, is really revolutionary. Not for nothing. I mean, Biggie did that too, but there's that. And then also just the last thing that I'll say is Tupac loved the underdog. He was somebody who very much had the belief in, and this is, very true of J. Cole popping into that studio or giving a producer arguably his biggest credit to date, like he did earlier this year. And you look at the stuff that Pac did in the last year of his life, and it was him that was using these big grandiose budgets to get Big Daddy Kane involved, to get Rappin' Forte involved. I interviewed CPO the Boss Hog, who is on Picture Me Rollin', and CPO told me he was an artist. He was signed to MC Ren, put out an album on Capitol back in the day, and was signed to Death Row, but at the lowest level. You see him on Murder Was the Case soundtrack and Above the Rim, but he wasn't living a life that reflected being on the biggest label at the time. I interviewed him 2011 or 2012 for Hip Hop DX, and CPO said, he always had this little friendship with Pac. When they would bump into each other, it was respect both ways, because Pac truly was a fan of the music. And when he learned, he had picked up another job just to support himself, but still had that rap dream, still doing that thing that we're talking about. And he learned that Pac had gotten out of jail and was recording. And he called the studio and said, could he speak to Tupac? And Pac called him back. And he said, what are you doing today? And CPO said, I would love to get on your song. And Pac said, come here right now. Come here today, and let's see what we can do. And if you look at All Eyes on Me, it's just filled with guests. He was putting people in positions of power. And CPO had said to me, and before he passed, that changed his life. It was a $37,000 check off of one verse when all the royalties cleared. But more importantly, it let a guy who had a dream know that he was still valid and still important and still could fit in on a chart-topping diamond record, which I think is just really remarkable. And I think Tupac, being a new kid on the block at Death Row, did a really good job of involving everybody, from producers to artists to behind-the-scenes people. There's a reason why anybody at that label would ride for him in the way that they did.
Yeah, that's crazy. One of the things that Cole talked about when he said he wasn't a leader is that he could imagine people seeing him as a leader in the business, even though he didn't see himself that way. And he reflected on how when he was coming up, he saw Tupac as a leader, and Nas and Jay-Z. And so it's interesting that Tupac was doing back then the same thing that J. Cole is doing now 30 years later, and putting new artists on. So that's a really dope story.
And in your 20s, man, like at a time, like, I don't know about you, like I'm a pretty, I know you're a good person. I'm a good person, but like I've gotten better and more loving with time. And Pac was so young, and to be thinking of other people so altruistically at that point is just really a testament to character, I think.
Yeah, man. And so, as it's very strange how often this happens, but, Tupac and Biggie often are tied, and historically for obvious reasons. But this week in the news, there was some Biggie news that came out too. So DJ Premier has got this series on YouTube called So What's Up, where he talks about different experiences that he's had in life, and he breaks down a couple tracks. The previous episode was on the making of Gangstar's Dwick, and on the most recent one, it was about the 10 Crack Commandments, and DJ Premier breaks down the story of how the 10 Crack Commandments came about. And so definitely go and check that out. I'll just go through quickly some of the highlights, but originally that beat was a promo beat for Angie Martinez's Top 5 at 9 on Hot 97. Those who were in New York in the 90s know that was a staple. At 9 o'clock, you tuned in to hear what the top 5 was on Hot 97, and Hot 97 was the premier hip hop radio station, not only in New York City, but in the entire country.
Where hip hop lives. Yeah.
It was where hip hop lives. Exactly. And J. Rue the Damager is actually the first who rapped on it. And so it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it stopped at 9 because it was at 9. And, and Premier was even intentional about the scratches. Like he would scratch 5 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to put the emphasis on the 5 and the 9. And J. Rue, Premier plays his verse, just smashed it. So Puff Daddy was on the radio with Angie Martinez one day, and he publicly asked Premier to call him. And people were hitting up Premier, yo, Puff just asked you to call. So Premier called into the radio. He had the special hotline, and and Puff said, yeah, Big wants this beat. And then, Premier notes that at that time there was some tension between Bad Boy and J. Rule. But Puff was like, listen, like, ask J. Rule if it's cool, I get the beat. And so, Premier asked J. Rule, and he's like, that's hip hop, man. Big is the homie. Give it to him. I don't want any money or anything. And Angie Martinez was cool with it too. And so the Premier got the green light. And because it only went up to 9, and it was the 10 crack commandments, not the 9 crack commandments, Primo had to find a 10. And so there was a song, I forget the Keith Murray song, but there was a countdown, like an astronaut kind of countdown. And he added that 10 to the 10. And that's why, it doesn't have
10,
that Z voice.
Yeah.
And then the song, completed Biggie's album. It was the last one recorded. And Premier says that there's a scene in Notorious, the B.I.G. film starring Gravy, where he's depicted as saying, I did it, I'm the greatest, after recording Sky's the Limit. Preem says, no, it was actually at that session that he said it. And like, he was really feeling it. Fun fact is for you is that I was actually working on that producer agreement when I got to the law firm. Shout out to Mark Levinson, who is still Premier's lawyer to this day, but I was his associate at the time, and he gave me the vast majority of Premier's production agreements from like 1997 to 1999. Were we like 10 years old, something like that?
Nah, man, I was 13, man.
13, okay. I was a lawyer doing deals with Premier and Rakim and Premier and Biggie, and you were in the
I was buying
grade.
The albums, man. I was making it possible.
7th grade, buying the albums, exactly. So yeah, we were bonded even then. But shout out to Mark Levinson and DJ Premier. But yo, a couple other things, quick things you want to run through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, like, I really I dig that series just because, people for years have been asking Premier, like I've been interviewing Premier for 18 years. And it's so much better when he can tell it and hold up the discs and really tell the story with the records around him. I've really, really, really enjoyed that series. So yeah, one of the things that I thought was interesting is JID meets Jay-Z. He reflected on that, and you and I both agreed JID made one of the best albums of 2022. It was absolutely snubbed at those other awards, but you and I gave it all the flowers we possibly could. But I thought it was interesting because I think that JID is a top artist of the moment, and he said this about meeting one of his biggest influences. He says, people that I'm a fan of, I don't give an F. I'm a fan out. I tweaked out when I met Jay-Z. He F's with me and I didn't tweak out. I was just like, and he admits that ironically he was gone off that Douce, which is, a liquor brand that Jay-Z is very, very, very much a part of. And he said, because I'd met him a couple of years ago, we said, what's up? And that was calm. But this time when I met him, he says, Elliot Wilson, shout out to Elliot, introduced us again. He was like, I remember, what's up? And then he hit me and he was like, congrats on the album. I really F with it. And JID said, in my mind, I'm asking questions like, oh, you heard it? Oh, I'm on tour right now and everything? And it just came out as thank you. And then I got up out of there. I walked away and thought about everything I wanted to say to him my whole life. And clearly he didn't say it. And I thought that that's a really interesting thing that happens, and I know it happens outside of, celebrity. I'm sure we've all had those moments where there's, somebody we got a crush on or, whatever, like where you just kind of stall out. But, for you, first of all, I mean, any thoughts on what the significance of Jay-Z and JID meeting?
Well, first of all, I think it's dope because Jay is a billionaire and got multi businesses going and is married to Beyonce and has kids and has got a lot going on in his life. But the fact that this guy repeatedly shows that he has his finger on the pulse of the culture, I think it's dope. I think that's super dope. And it doesn't surprise me that someone like Jid would land on his radar because for the same reason as we love him. Also, clearly Cole and like that affinity, but Jay, I've seen reports is up on Mach-Hommy and like people who like, a lot of like serious hip hop heads are up on, like he really is in those trenches when it comes to it. So that part is dope to me. But I thought the story was funny for the reasons you pointed out. I have a story. So Prince is one of my favorite artists of all time. And I was at this spot in New York City called Madam X. This is back in like 1997, 98. It's all red, and my boys and I are there, and they always play joints there, lounge music and stuff like that. But then they start playing this crazy Prince set, and they're playing super deep album cuts like the Ballad of Dorothy Parker and stuff like that from Sign of Times. And I'm like, yo, what's going on? Like, is Prince in here or something? Like, just jokingly, right? So my guy gets up and goes to the bathroom. And he's like, yo, I hear Prince is here. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, man. Like, I think these dudes are trying to wind me up because they know what a Prince stan I am. And he's like, nah, man, for real. Like, that's what I heard. So I get up and I go to the bathroom, and I'm thinking about all these things that I'm going to say to Prince if I see him. You know, again, I had just become an entertainment lawyer, and Prince had just gotten out of his deal with EMI. Shout out to Londell McMillan, now owner of The Source, who got him. He was the emancipator, Prince called him. But I'm competitive, and I'm like thinking, yeah, you know, I'm gonna see Prince. I'm like, yo, when you need another entertainment lawyer, you know, you come to me, come to the best. Like, you know, I got my swag on, right? And as I'm coming from the bathroom, I see this figure just floating through the air, right? Because Prince, his feet didn't touch the ground, man. This dude just floated through the air. And so I see him and I'm like, oh my God, that's Prince, right? And it's like a movie where, you know, the crowd just parts and it's in slow motion. And we go and we're face to face. And I get to him and I'm preparing to say all this stuff. And I open my mouth, and out of my mouth comes, "You're my hero." And dude, I've never thought that about anyone. I've never said that to anyone. And so and he looks at me like, and he smiles at me and nods and, like, you know, floats away. And I'm like, ah, man, this is crazy. So but that was my Prince story. So I relate to Jid, man, and that desire to, like, meet your hero and tell them and say all these things and appear cool and all that, man. But we all melt. And I thought it was dope that Jid, who's now pretty established, right? Like, he doesn't have that Grammy nomination, but he's selling out multiple shows in New
He
York
got a
City. And, like,
billion streams with Imagine Dragons. Like, he's breaking.
exactly. Yeah. He's like that guy, and he's still, like, fanning out. So I thought it was dope and really cool and humble for him to acknowledge that too, you know?
It's happened to me 2 times in my life, much like you. Was both times was in a hallway, and you know, Ambrosia for Head sent me to the Soundset Fest in 2019, and DMX and Just Blaze were in a hotel bar, and I was sitting with, you know, some of our favorite people that you and I have gotten to know over the years, Richie Abbott and Sean Sotero, you know, and my man Andres Tardio. Like, we're all sitting there having drinks, just carrying on. Jake Rohn, other writers and journalists and people in media, and over at the bar are some of the artists. And DMX was there in a Randy Moss jersey from Minnesota, like the right throwback for the right time in the city. And I happened to use the restroom, and X was, you know, coming from the hallway. I'm going down in towards the bathroom, pause, and I see DMX, and I don't know what to say. Like, he's a very important artist to me, and meant a lot to me, especially, you know, in 98, early 2000s. And I just looked at him and I went and I saluted him. And X, you know, had done some partying that night, and he stopped and he looked at me and he did the exact same thing. And it was cool. It was cool because, you know, I didn't need to drag him away from what he was doing. But obviously, like, afterwards, I'm like, man, I would have loved to have just better verbalized what his music meant to me, especially now, you know, he's not here. And at a very similar time with Mike Tomlin. I'm a diehard Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I was up at the Steelers office one time with my dad. My dad owns a picture framing business and hangs artwork. And he was like, yo, you want to ride with me and hang some artwork, maybe see a Steeler or two? And the Steelers were having a rough season. I think it was 2013. And I walked down the hallway, and it's just me and Mike Tomlin, and they had won their, like, first game of the season against the Jets. And I looked at Mike Tomlin, and my voice probably kind of squeaked, and I was like, good game, coach. And but Mike Tomlin nodded. And then for, like, the next day, I was like, yo, am I corny for calling him coach? Like, I don't play for the Steelers, but I think it's a sign of respect. But those are my two awkward ones.
Yeah, nah, for sure, man. Coach is the right move. No, that's dope. That's dope. Well, one other quick news story before we get into some new music happenings is an unfortunate one. We reported on this a couple of years ago. I can't remember what the exact year was. I'm thinking 2018, 2019, but there was a shootout that happened in Irving Plaza in New York, a venue that I've frequented many, many times. In fact, that Reason show that I was just talking about, where I had the conversation with Top Dog, was there. And I've been backstage where this shootout happened, but it was between Taxstone, who's a podcast personality, and and also Troy Ave, and it ended up in someone dying, the bodyguard for
Banger.
Troy
Yeah.
Ave, Banga, Ronald McFadder. Troy Ave was shot, as well as I think 4 or 5 other people. Well, Taxstone was found guilty of that shooting and the killing, and is awaiting sentencing. But these kind of tragedies are not something we like reporting on, but is something that's happened in the culture that affects people we've covered, and so definitely gotta provide that news.
Sean Sotero, who I just mentioned, has been doing a lot of frontline reporting on that, and explained why found guilty of manslaughter versus other charges. But yeah, that's a case that I've checked out a little bit, but yeah, just kind of a dark news update.
Yeah, but so moving on to new music events, a couple things I want to talk about before I turn it over to you is, so Tony, led by Raphael Sadiq, it just put out an announcement they are coming back on a reunion. I've never seen them. I've seen Raphael Sadiq before, and folks might know that he played a pretty instrumental role in D'Angelo's first album, wrote the song "Lady," and he has a collaboration called "Be Here" with him on his own solo album. But just a legend, and the three of them together should be amazing. And so, looking forward to that. Also, I mentioned this last week, but Larry June and the Alchemists have a new album coming out called The Escape, The Great Escape. It's coming out on March 31st. I cannot wait, because Alchemist, kind of like Paulo Brown, every year he'll do 2 or 3 albums with one MC. Last year, the Rock Marciano joint was incredible. Year before that, I think, was Freddie Gibbs. He's got
Armand Hammer,
yeah, Currency last year too. But man, and Larry June is one of my favorite MCs of the last few years. I really kind of latched on to his movement maybe a year or so ago, and now, he's just such a smooth kind of throwback, laid back MC. But the Great Escape documentary shows a lot of footage of them in the studio. So if you want a sneak preview of the album, you'll hear a bunch of cuts that they recorded together, and you'll also see their process. I found it interesting because a lot of Larry June's music sounds like night music to me, but they were in this I don't know if it was someone's home or they rented it, but it was all windows overlooking a pool and a beach, and they were recording in the daylight for the most part. And they were cooking ribs and chicken and everything. It looked really like a real cool hang. But that's coming out, next week, and you can catch the documentary on YouTube now, The Great Escape documentary. But what other new music you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's really one big song right now, and we got it atop our playlist. I guess there's a couple, I should say. One is, coming off of 4 albums now, 3 installments of King's Disease, plus the 2021 kind of holiday gift magic. Hit Boy and Nas have a new one. It's called The Tide. It's from Hit Boy's new album, which is called Surf or Swim, which is thematic to his record label called Surf School. But it's called The Tide, and it's interesting. It's got a beat change in it. It starts out with kind of a vocal sample, and then it moves and he adds those trap drums. And yeah, we've got it near the top or at the top of our playlist right now. Just those guys, high level of quality. And what's interesting is it coincides with an interview that Hit Boy had done with Producer's Grind, where he revealed, beyond just giving beats, and I thought it's so interesting that he even knew the exact figure. He was like, there's 54 songs we've done together, which I think extends back before the first King's Disease. There were a couple of places they had gotten, songs in. He's engineered 50 out of 54. So again, just to bring it full circle, we're talking about just investing in yourself and doing everything and work ethic, all these things. I mean, these guys are in the studio and Hit Boy is doing the work, you know, on the producer side, and Nas is very obviously doing the work on the MC side. But in that conversation, he explained a little bit why they work so well together. He said, when I work with Nas, it's literally just me and him in there. I'm doing the beats, he's doing the rhymes. And then a lot of times when you work with younger artists, they're going to pull up with like 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 guys. And I'm really here just to do my job. He says, some people flourish in that. And plenty of times I've had my own sessions with a bunch of people in there. But when you're really trying to cultivate something special, you got to protect that space and that energy. That's why I feel like me and Nas can flow like this, because most of the time it's just us in the studio. And I remember speaking to Nas 2010 and Damian Marley. I interviewed Nas and I interviewed Damian a few times. And that was the case back then too. I mean, Nas, you want to talk about just kind of keeping it focused, keeping it low key. That's something he's always done. And, you know, there's a lot of fans out there that really believe this KD series is some of the best. But definitely check that out on Hit Boy's album. He has Currency. He's got Dom Kennedy, Surf or Drown, by the way, it's called. And he's got Alchemist is on there. They did a song together. Just some different people. So 100% check that out. It was dope. Hit Boy reacted to our coverage of the song on the album and said, thank you. Always love when the artists receive the efforts that you and I do to show love. So
Yeah, for sure.
You have another song.
One other interesting thing that Hit Boy said for me was, he said, it ain't no bunch of outside opinions and people throwing off the zone we in, which, you know, again, like even speaks to that J. Cole notion of not having people like, and Rapsody provide negativity. So it's just interesting how common this element seems to be. Yeah, the other song that dropped, which is on our playlist as well, is Lloyd Banks released a song with Method Man called 101 Razors. And it's just another example where steel sharpens steel, Lloyd Banks is one of those guys who sneakily puts out like a project every, year or two. It's always quality, consistent. You know what you're going to get, but he always delivers. And I think this song is a real good indication of what we might expect if he's got a full project coming.
Definitely. I mean, and Meth, I think you and I have both talked to Meth of just what a fan of MC's he is. I know you did. You did an interview with him in 2015 where he spoke about Sean Price and MF Doom and, some of these artists that were really inspirational to him well into his career. And I know that Meth has been, a huge fan of just like true barsmiths and like punchline guys, RJ Payne and, and look no further than the PLK, the Punchline King, self-proclaimed himself, Lloyd Banks. So this is a really cool collaboration. And I'm really excited and should do a lot for both of these guys.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it should be super dope. So with that said, what's your song of the week?
So, I specifically held it for here, but Mr. Fab put out a new album called I Am, spelled EYEAM. Have you ever in your life seen a Mr. Fab concert?
No, I have not.
So you and I were talking about South by Southwest. He did the 2011 Hip Hop DX showcase and absolutely tore it down. I mean, Mr. Fab is one of the best live performers I've ever seen. Freestyle off the dome stuff. He does crowd work similar to Supernatural, can rap about things in the crowd. The energy of that night was so insane. And it wasn't the Shiner Box or the Lone Star Beers talking. It was just a truly great show. Actually, Nardwar popped up, Diplo. We had Yellow Wolf perform. It was one of my favorite South by showcases that I was a part of. So I've always been a fan of Fab the MC, and usually every year he does a Sway in the Morning freestyle that's always among the best. So he put an album out, and Fab, if you've never listened to a Mr. Fab album or you haven't in some time, check this album out. It is personal. It is very well produced. It has a million quotables on it. And he's got a song on there called Never 12, which is, actually, I'll just say it. It's my favorite song that came out this week. So I have to give that props. But on that album, he's got Murs on there and some other people. It's worth checking out. But what about you?
That's dope. Yeah, man, I've definitely been a huge fan of Mr. Fab's freestyles. Those, like you said, those Sway ones have been not just the best of the year, but some of the best ever, I think. And always off the top, like it's just, he's mind blowing. So for me, I just finished the last episode, the series finale of the Wu-Tang Clan show, Wu-Tang: An American Saga, the other day, and no spoilers, but there was something that made me hear shadow boxing as many times as I've heard it before in a different way, especially Mess First, and so it resonated with me differently this week. So I'm gonna go with the Geniuses, shadow boxing.
Absolutely, man. That's you sent it to me this week on a text, and I love that Liquid Swords album. And oddly enough, Benny the Butcher, French Montana, and DJ Drama kind of did we used to call it bridging the gap, but like they made an homage this year to shadowboxing. It's called, and this lets you know right here, the song is called RZA. So for all you Wu fans or folks that like homage that way, check that one out too.
That's dope. All right, man. Well, always a pleasure. You held up for a dude who's sick, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to drink tea and I'm going to do all this work. So it's all good, man. But I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And I wish everyone out there a good weekend, good week ahead. And, until we do it again.
For sure. Hope you feel better, man.
Thank you, man. Peace.
Peace.